In this lesson, we'll create an external roughing toolpath. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to create a profile toolpath and identify toolpath options. For this lesson, we want to carry on with our turning cam setup from the previous lesson. Now we're going to take a look at creating our first operation. And to do this, we're going to go up to turning and we're going to be selecting turning profile roughing. Now, this is generally not the first operation you do. We generally start with a facing operation, but I want to take a look at this one first as it's going to give us a great result so we can see exactly what it's doing. So we'll start with turning profile rough. And what you'll notice is that we have a preview of a section through the revolved part. So this is exactly what we're trying to machine to. And we have our stock model or the outside of the part that we need to remove. The first thing that we need to do is select a tool. When we go into select a tool, you'll notice that this design already has 4 tools in it. We have 2 different tool number ones. You'll notice that there is a problem here with the tool numbering that we'll have to handle later. We've got an internal boring bar, and then we have another tool that can be used for some finishing operations. So for this, we're going to get started with tool number 1, which is our MCLNR. This is a right-hand turning tool, and we're going to select this. Notice that now we have a preview on the screen. If I go to a top view, you can see where the tool is coming from, positive X. The next thing that I want to note is that the mode is set to outside profiling by default, and this is exactly what we want to use. Next, we're going to make sure that we leave the tool orientation, clearance, back, and front exactly the same. These are all the default values. These are going to be set to 0. And I'm not going to modify any of the tool settings to get started, and we'll use the default presets for feeds and speeds. Moving on to our geometry. In this instance, we're going to allow it to look between 2 planes. A front plane, and this here has front minus 0.05 and the back is minus 2.05. So these planes are based off of our part and not our stock. We need to make sure that we understand that if we need to increase the look ahead or the amount that we're leaving on the back of the part. So what we want to make sure that we do here is that we extend it past the back. So the front is going to be set to model front and the back is going to be set to model back. However, we are going to make sure that we use an offset value. I'm going to add minus 0.2 and notice that the plane moves back minus 0.2. Keep in mind, however, when we look at the number on this plane, it's actually minus 2.25. Now, if you remember from our setup, that is exactly where we stuck the chuck on this. We're only holding the back of the part with a 1/4 inch between the stock and the chuck and the back of our part. So we need to make sure that we account for that so that our tool doesn't travel into the chuck. So instead of 0.20, I'm going to reduce this to 0.15. This means that it's going to take it back to minus 2.2, and we should have enough clearance here. For the next tab, we have to determine what our clearance values are going to be. I'm going to use most of the defaults. However, the inner radius, instead of using the stock ID, I'm going to use a selection. I'm going to grab that inside surface of that board. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I want to make sure that the tool doesn't try to go all the way into that section. Now, generally it wouldn't because we're using outside profiling, but it's always good to make sure that we are in complete control of where the tool can go and where it can't. Next, we have passes section, and I'm not really going to make any adjustments to these. I want to take a look at the defaults first before I modify any of the parameters. So you'll notice here that we have stock to leave because we're doing a roughing operation, and that's fine. We're going to make sure that we leave a small amount to come back and finish. And when we take a look at some of the other options, even depths of cut is off by default, make sharp corners is on by default, and then we also have some other options that we might want to turn on. Things like no dragging. No dragging is an option that will determine how the tool is going to handle some of these vertical faces. Now, the tool that we're using is actually going to be tapered and it's not going to be able to machine these walls anyways, but I like to turn this option on if I want to prevent it from dragging up those faces. Lastly, there is a linking parameters section, and I'm going to use all the default values for the clearance and the safe Z approaches. And we're going to say OK, and we're going to get a preview of this toolpath. When we view this from the top, What we're seeing here is the stock that we're starting with, and then the material that's getting removed. Now, if your display looks different than mine, make sure that you are showing the in-process stock. If you don't have that displayed, what you're going to see is this sort of cross section, this yellow area that is a sectioned plane of the revolved solid. Now, either option is fine if you would rather see this with the part underneath it, or if you'd rather see the stock. Either is a great option. Just make sure that you understand which one of these you're looking at. You can also change the transparency of that stock. What we want to make sure that we understand is what the tool is doing and what is actually being removed. You'll note that the material on the front is still there, so I'm going to come to turning. I'm going to go to turn facing. Using the same tool in all the default settings, I'm just going to say OK and allow it to create that facing toolpath. Then I'm going to drag it before my profile roughing. Now, if we take a look at the preview, you see that the stock is being removed from the front first, and then we're doing the profile roughing. This is generally the workflow that you would want to make sure that you face the end of the part so you know exactly where you're starting. This also allows you to have a small amount of clearance when you're leading into the stock removal. This is the first operation that we really wanted to explore, as profile roughing is usually the go-to to just get the most amount of material away from the part before you get into finishing it. So from here, make sure that you do save the file before you move on. And then as soon as you have it saved, make sure you move on to the next step where we'll carry on finishing this part.